faint line of light in a sky already crowded with stars. Then a telescope in Hawaii called Atlas caught it during its nightly scan. The software marked it as unusual, but it was the human eyes that lingered. The line didn't behave the way ordinary comets do. It wasn't looping gently around the sun. It was diving through space like a guest with no plans to stay. When astronomers traced its path, they realized it wasn't bound to the sun at all. It had come from far beyond the outer planets, far beyond anything we call ours. They gave it a formal name, 3R Atlas, the third known visitor from another star. But among those who watched it glide across the black, a quiet thought began to rise, the kind that keeps people awake long after the screens go dark. What if this isn't only a rock? No one said alien aloud at first. In science, you start with what you can measure: speed, direction, brightness, color. Still, the numbers were odd enough to make people pause. The object was moving faster than anything born of our sun, its course cut cleanly across the plane of the planets, almost as if it had chosen that path. Its brightness barely changed, meaning it wasn't tumbling wildly like broken debris. It spun slowly, smoothly, as though balanced. That steadiness made even cautious astronomers lean closer to their monitors. Imagine standing outside on a clear night, the kind where the stars look sharp and close. Somewhere up there, a tiny traveler from another world is sliding past. You can't see it with your eyes, but it's there, a pin of light slipping between constellations. It's been flying for ages, maybe longer than our planet has had life, crossing empty distances where even starlight grows thin. Now, by a quiet accident of motion, it has wandered close enough for us to notice. That idea alone is enough to slow the breath. Somewhere in that dim glow is material formed around a different star, under a different sun. Grains of dust that once orbited another world are now brushing sunlight from ours. It's as if the universe reached out and placed a sample on our doorstep. Telescopes turned one by one. The big mirrors in Chile caught it first, followed by observatories in Hawaii, the Canary Islands, and space telescopes drifting high above the atmosphere. Each instrument looked for something slightly different: color, heat, trace gases, the faint halo called the coma that forms when ice begins to melt. Bit by bit, a picture formed. The object was reddish, like old iron or dried clay. Its surface was dark, absorbing most of the sunlight that touched it. Around it shimmered a thin veil of gas, mostly carbon dioxide. That was strange. Most comets near the sun breathe out water first, then other gases later. This one exhaled carbon dioxide almost alone, as if it had been born in a colder nursery where even water had frozen solid forever. Scientists compared it to samples we know: the Tagish Lake meteorite, pieces of Phobos, dust from the outer asteroid belt. None matched perfectly. Each test answered one question and raised two more. Why so much carbon dioxide? Why so little water? Why was its orbit tilted just enough to skim the same plane as the planets? Every answer hinted at another mystery. Meanwhile, the public fell into its own rhythm of wondering. Videos appeared online, each more certain than the last. Some claimed proof of alien technology. Others swore it was a natural comet with an unusual shape. The truth, as always, was quieter than either story. In the long halls of observatories, scientists talked not about aliens, but about chemistry, radiation, and time. Yet even they could feel the pull of the question. You don't have to believe in starships to admit how strange this object is. You only have to look. There's a kind of awe that doesn't need noise, the kind that lives in data points glowing on a dark screen. That's the feeling that filled the control rooms as more images arrived. Astronomers plotted its motion frame by frame, watching as it moved closer to the sun. Each night it shifted a little faster, a little brighter, a little harder to believe. It wasn't looping back, it was passing through. A guest, not a neighbor. Somewhere around this time, a few brave voices started to ask the question in print. Could it be artificial? The suggestion came from Avi Loeb, a respected astrophysicist known for pushing boundaries politely but firmly. He didn't claim that 3I Atlas was a ship. only that the idea shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. After all, humanity sends probes across its own system, voyagers, pioneers, little metal messengers carrying greetings into the dark. If we do that, why couldn't another civilization, older and more patient, do the same? And if one of their messengers ever crossed our path, wouldn't it look, at first, exactly like this? A small, silent object drifting between stars? The thought lingers, doesn't it? You can almost picture it. Not a flashing saucer or a gleaming hull, but a quiet, weathered craft, its engines long cold, coasting forever on inertia and sunlight. Maybe it no longer serves a purpose. Maybe the beings who made it are gone. Yet here it is, a relic, drifting into our awareness for a heartbeat before continuing on. Whether or not that's true hardly matters tonight. What matters is the feeling it brings, the sense that the universe might be even more alive than we dared to hope. When you stare up at the stars, you can almost sense motion in the stillness, as if something is always crossing between them. As the weeks passed, the comet drew nearer to the inner planet. Observatories tracked it relentlessly, noting tiny changes in its coma and tail. At times, the tail seemed to point toward the sun instead of away, a detail that puzzled even seasoned observers. The explanation, when it came, was simple but beautiful. Particles so fine that light itself pushed them backward, while heavier dust fell forward in a slow, graceful arc. Physics can look like magic when you see it written across the sky. During one of those clear nights, the James Webb Space Telescope gathered infrared light from the object. In those wavelengths, the comet's faint glow turned into a spectrum, a rainbow stretched thin by distance. Inside that spectrum were clues, lines where carbon dioxide absorbed light, faint dips where dust scattered heat. From those patterns, scientists could read temperature, density, and even hints of the molecules escaping from its surface. What they found confirmed earlier suspicions. This visitor was unlike anything born under our sun. Now imagine the scene in a dark control room. A group of astronomers leans toward a monitor, faces lit blue by the data. Outside the building, the night air hums with crickets. Inside, someone whispers, "There it is." On the screen, a faint curve of light drifts across the frame. No engines, no message, just motion. Yet in that motion lies the story of another world. You might think science kills mystery, but often it does the opposite. Each answer deepens the wonder. Knowing that a rock can travel from one star to another doesn't make the universe smaller. It makes it infinite in a new way. It means that worlds exchange gifts. Dust from their beginnings becomes the seeds of ours. Perhaps in time, dust from Earth will drift outward too, carrying quiet evidence of the creatures who once looked up and asked questions. That's the heart of this story. 3i Atlas may not be a mothership. It may never have carried life or machines or even a purpose beyond existing. But in a sense, it is a messenger. It reminds us that nothing in the cosmos stands still, that even the coldest space hums with motion. Every grain of matter has a journey. And sometimes, against all odds, those journeys cross. So as you settle into rest, picture that traveler continuing its path. Past the orbit of Mars now, drifting toward the sunlight, shedding faint gas that glows like frost. In a few months, it will round the sun and begin its long escape, fading back into the interstellar dark. It will carry with it traces of our system, photons that touched it here, particles that brushed against it, tiny fingerprints of its brief meeting with us. Long after our own age has ended, it will still be moving, a solitary point of memory between stars. If someday, far in the future, another civilization spots it crossing their sky, they might wonder what world it once passed. They might point their telescopes, measure its spectrum, and whisper the same question we asked tonight. What if it's a ship? What if someone once sent it? And maybe, for a heartbeat, the cosmos will feel smaller again as two distant minds share the same curiosity across time. The closer 3i Atlas drifted toward the sun, the more attention it drew from Earth. Every major telescope, from mountain-top domes to satellites in orbit, turned its mirrors toward that faint traveler. The object itself never grew bright enough for the naked eye, but through the lenses of these instruments it became a small, glowing world, wrapped in vapor like breath on a cold morning. Scientists described it in simple terms: radius, albedo, composition, but behind their measured words lay something more personal: wonder. Each line of data represented light that had crossed millions of kilometers just to reach a sensor on our little planet. Each photon carried a story about where the object had come from and what it had endured. And together those stories began to paint a portrait of age beyond imagination. For the people following the discoveries online, that portrait changed daily. A new image here, a new spectrum there. Most showed a hazy sphere surrounded by a pale halo of dust. But one image, taken by the Hubble telescope, captured something unexpected: a second, fainter tail stretching the wrong way toward the sun instead of away. Comets normally grow tails that stream behind them as solar wind blows their gas and dust outward. This one seemed to ignore that rule. The simplest explanation was physics. The particles were fine enough for sunlight itself to push them into strange shapes. Yet it also fed the imagination. A few late-night voices on social media called it an antenna, others a thruster plume. The idea of artificial design spread like ripples on still water, not because people truly believed they were watching a ship, but because the possibility reminded them that the universe could still surprise us. At the observatories, surprise came in quieter forms. Spectra gathered by the James Webb Space Telescope confirmed what earlier instruments hinted. The coma surrounding three-eyed Atlas was rich in carbon dioxide, far richer than any comet native to our solar system. A chemical clue told scientists something about its origin. In a newborn star system, temperature decreases with distance from the star. Water freezes relatively close in, but carbon dioxide turns solid only much farther out, in regions so cold that sunlight is little more than a dim glow. If this object held that much CO2, it must have formed in an outer realm of its own star system, colder than the farthest edges of ours. Imagine the scene billions of years ago. A young star blazing in a distant corner of the galaxy, surrounded by a swirling disk of dust and gas. Tiny grains bump together, stick, and slowly build larger bodies. Most stay nearby, becoming moons and planets. But a few wander too close to heavy neighbors, get flung outward, and are lost to interstellar space. That's likely how three-eyed Atlas began its endless journey, cast out by chance, carrying with it the frozen chemistry of its birthplace. For ages beyond counting, it drifted through darkness. No star to warm it, no gravity strong enough to change its path. Cosmic rays bombarded its surface, altering molecules grain by grain. The outer layers turned red from radiation damage, giving it the hue that telescopes now record. Inside, untouched ice preserved the memory of that first star system. Then by one small twist of geometry, it crossed the sun's influence and found us. When scientists speak of such timescales, they often pause. There's humility in realizing that an object can wander for billions of years and still arrive right on schedule for us to notice it. It's easy to talk about data, harder to ignore the quiet awe behind it. Even the most grounded researchers admit a feeling close to reverence. Across the world, classrooms used the comet to teach orbital mechanics. Children plotted its path on paper models, learning how a hyperbolic trajectory differs from an ellipse. Some asked the same question adults were whispering. If it came from another star, could it carry anything living? The teachers smiled and explained how cold space would destroy life as we know it. Yet a few let the question linger because curiosity is the seed of science. The next set of measurements came from instruments in Chile's Atacama Desert. There, the air is so dry and clear that starlight seems to have weight. Observers watched Three-Eye Atlas for long nights, tracking subtle variations in brightness as it rotated. The light curve suggested a gentle spin every 17 hours or so, steady, unhurried. If the object were truly a comet, its rotation should sometimes change as jets of gas erupted from its surface. This one remained calm. The stability fascinated researchers. It meant the visitor was either nearly spherical or its surface vents balanced one another perfectly. Both options were rare. One astronomer compared it to a perfectly balanced top spinning in slow motion across a tabletop of stars. Another joked that if aliens had built it, they must have had excellent engineers. Everyone laughed, then went back to checking calibration numbers, but the image stuck. In the following months, the comet drew close enough for Mars-based instruments to catch it. Robotic eyes on orbiters turned toward the sky, capturing faint streaks as it passed. Even the rover cameras attempted long exposures. The resulting pictures were little more than smudges, but those smudges came from another star system. That realization alone gave them value beyond beauty. Meanwhile, the debate continued. Most scientists agreed it was natural, a fragment of rock and ice obeying physics. A small minority kept the door slightly open, not because they expected evidence of alien technology, but because closing the door too quickly would betray the spirit of inquiry that drives discovery. One evening, during an online conference, a young researcher summarized the feeling perfectly. She said, "It probably isn't a ship. But if it were, this is exactly how we would first see it. Quiet, distant, ordinary, until we looked closer." The room fell silent for a heartbeat, everyone picturing the same thing, an artifact adrift, patient and forgotten, carrying the story of its makers through eternity. Then someone cleared his throat and changed the subject to spectra again. Still, that image hung in the air. Out in space, Three-Eye Atlas kept moving. The sun's warmth woke more of its surface. Jets of gas puffed gently, forming filaments of dust that curled like smoke. To the telescopes they looked delicate, almost fragile, yet each stream was larger than mountains. From Earth, they formed a soft fan that spread and shimmered before fading into space. If you could somehow stand on a safe ship nearby, the scene would take your breath. You'd see a dim grey nucleus, rough and uneven, glowing faintly as sunlight scattered through the dust. No sound at all, only the silent unfolding of ice turning to vapor. Around you, stars would stretch in every direction, and ahead, the sun would shine like a distant fire. That is what the astronomers were trying to imagine each time they studied the data, the true, quiet reality behind the numbers. In early reports, they noted the age implied by its orbit. To have such speed and direction, Three-Eye Atlas must have been ejected from its home system billions of years ago, possibly when the galaxy itself was still young. That made it one of the oldest objects ever observed passing through our neighborhood. Older than the planets, older than Earth's oceans. It had been waiting for eons to cross our sightline. That knowledge carried an odd comfort. The object had seen countless stars rise and fade. It had traveled through interstellar clouds, through silence and radiation, through distances so large our language breaks trying to describe them. And now, for a brief moment, it was close enough that human beings, fragile, temporary creatures, could study it. Night after night, as data continued to pour in, scientists grew almost protective of the visitor. They spoke about it as if it were alive, though they knew it wasn't. They said things like, "She's stable tonight," or "She's flaring again." Maybe it was habit or maybe affection. When you watch something move across your sky for months, you can't help but feel connection. Public interest faded slightly as the object became harder to see against the sun's glare, but in observatories, the work went on. The teams prepared for the next phase, its reappearance after passing behind the sun. Models predicted that by then it would show its longest tail and shed the most material. Some even hoped it might fragment, revealing the internal layers scientists dream of analyzing. Whatever happened, it would be brief. The visitor was already speeding toward its exit path, soon to vanish back into the deep. Before that happened, one last wave of discussion swept through the scientific community. If 3i Atlas was not a ship, could it still teach us about others that might be? If natural interstellar objects pass through regularly and new telescopes like the Vera Rubin Observatory suggest they do, then perhaps we'll find one that truly defies natural explanation someday. The universe rarely sends gifts twice, but it always leaves the door open for patience. That idea, more than anything, is what makes this story worth telling at bedtime. Not the hope of aliens, not the fear of the unknown, but the gentle awareness that our sky is not a closed room. We live in a moving universe full of travelers we have yet to meet, and every so often, one of them drifts close enough for us to notice. So tonight, if you step outside and look up, think of 3i Atlas gliding beyond the reach of our sun again. It's small, silent, indifferent to our questions, yet it connects us to something vast. The same starlight that glimmers on your skin now will touch its surface days from now, then continue outward toward other worlds. That shared light makes us neighbors, even across the emptiness. And as you breathe slowly, you might realize the truth that keeps astronomers awake, yet strangely calm. Discovery is not always about answers. Sometimes it's about noticing what passes by, honoring the wonder, and letting it go. The visitor will fade, but the curiosity it sparked will linger. Quiet, steady, like the rotation of a small red-tinged body continuing its long journey between the stars. By the time 3i Atlas reached the inner part of the solar system, the sun had taken hold of it completely. Its surface, once frozen and still, began to stir. Sunlight seeped into its crust, warming the ancient ice trapped beneath. The result wasn't dramatic, no explosions or fiery bursts, just slow breaths of gas leaking into space. From afar, these gentle exhalations looked like faint streams of fog curling into the void. They caught sunlight, scattering it into a faint, glowing halo. To human eyes, through the glass of telescopes, it was a soft blur of light against blackness. Astronomers compared notes, as they always do. One team measured brightness changes. Another tracked how the object's color shifted as it released more carbon dioxide. The findings were small, delicate, but every piece added to the larger portrait. 3i Atlas was stable, predictable. It behaved almost too calmly for an object. So ancient, moving so fast, it seemed strangely balanced, like something engineered to endure the endless dark. That word, engineered, wasn't used in the papers, but it floated between conversations. Scientists are careful with their language, yet curiosity has a way of sneaking into the edges of formality. It's unusual, someone might say, remarkably consistent. Those words are safe, but inside them lives the quieter thought everyone shares. What are we really looking at? From Earth, the object was now beyond naked sight, but space telescopes kept their watch. The James T. Webb telescope continued to record infrared light, capturing subtle signatures that spoke of dust composition. Hubble, despite its age, followed in optical wavelengths. And back on Earth, smaller observatories worked through the night, stacking exposures, hundreds of photographs combined into a single, clear view. Each image looked like little more than a dim speck, but when processed, they revealed the same truth. 3i Atlas was leaving us. That's how all stories like this go. A discovery, a burst of fascination, then distance again. The universe gives us a glimpse and then closes the curtain. But before that curtain fell, something unexpected happened. A solar storm erupted from the sun, a surge of charged particles sweeping across the inner system. It brushed past the path of the comet. Instruments on Earth registered small but noticeable changes in its brightness, as if the storm had nudged the gas cloud surrounding it. The object itself remained intact, unbothered, steady in its motion. If it had been fragile, the wave of solar energy might have torn it apart. But it didn't. It simply continued on, unchanged. That quiet resilience drew attention. A rock, yes, but a remarkably tough one. At the same time, more data arrived about its origin. A group of researchers traced its inbound velocity and direction backward across millions of years. They found that it had likely come from the thick disk of our galaxy, a region filled with older, metal-poor stars. If that was true, then 3II Atlas was unimaginably old, perhaps 7 or 8 billion years. Older than the Sun itself. Think about that for a moment. When our planet was still molten rock, this little traveler was already moving between stars, already drifting through space, older than anything we can name. That's why scientists love such discoveries. They connect the ancient with the present in a single line of motion. Now imagine that age as a kind of memory carved into the object's body. Layers of ice turned to glass by radiation, tiny fractures sealed by cosmic frost, minerals rearranged by endless exposure to starlight. Every mark, every molecule tells a piece of the galaxy's past. And in those details there might be clues not just about how other star systems form, but how matter itself survives time. That's what science really is at moments like this, the slow listening to what the universe whispers. Still, the public imagination refused to let go of the more dramatic idea. What if it's a ship? The question persisted in headlines, podcasts, and late-night discussions, not because people were convinced, but because the possibility added warmth to the cold distances of space. A ship implies intention, and intention means company. The thought that someone else might once have crossed the same galaxy gives comfort. Even among scientists, that comfort wasn't dismissed entirely. Many said privately that while 3I Atlas was likely natural, the simple act of searching for signs of life was itself worthwhile. Every telescope pointed at that small dot represented more than curiosity. It represented hope. During a live interview, one astronomer explained it this way: "We're looking not because we expect to find aliens, but because the act of looking teaches us who we are." Her voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. The moment you raise your eyes to the stars, you're already reaching beyond yourself. That idea spread quietly. Teachers used it in classrooms, artists painted it. Someone wrote a lullaby inspired by 3I Atlas, a soft tune that children could fall asleep to, imagining the visitor gliding through the dark. It became something larger than science. It became a symbol of wonder itself. By now, the object had passed its closest approach to the Sun. Its bright phase peaked, then began to fade. Observatories recorded how the coma thinned, how the tail stretched longer and more diffuse. The speed increased slightly as it was slingshotted by solar gravity, preparing to leave the system. Astronomers spoke of it in the past tense already, though it was still visible through their instruments. That's how quickly a visitor can become a memory. But data kept coming. A European team noticed something peculiar in their spectra, a trace of nickel in the gas surrounding the object, but no sign of iron. Normally, when comets shed material, both metals appear in similar ratios. The imbalance was new. Theories followed. Perhaps the nickel was trapped in organic compounds that broke down earlier, or maybe the iron was bound more tightly in the nucleus. Others wondered if the nickel might have formed through ancient cosmic radiation, rearranging the atoms themselves over billions of years. Each theory was a quiet act of imagination dressed as analysis. Every scientist builds small worlds in their mind to explain what they see, and sometimes those worlds are almost poetic. Beyond the calculations, though, one truth held steady. We were witnessing something that had traveled farther than any spacecraft humanity had ever made. Think about that. All our probes combined, the Voyagers, the Pioneers, the New Horizons craft, have not yet reached another star. But this single rock had already crossed from one to another, unassisted, unknowing, carrying stories written in chemistry instead of language. In that sense, 3i Atlas was a teacher. It reminded us that the cosmos moves on its own timetable, not ours, that the most extraordinary things don't announce themselves. They simply pass by, waiting to be noticed. By late in the year, the object was too close to the sun's glare for Earth-based telescopes to see. Astronomers paused their observations, waiting for it to reappear on the far side. It would take weeks. During that gap, there was a kind of silence in the data streams, a pause that felt almost like holding one's breath. When it finally emerged again, it was fainter, but still there, alive as much as a rock can be alive. The tail, once wide and bright, had stretched thin into a ghostly line. The coma had shrunk. It was cooling again, going back to sleep. Its long orbit was carrying it away from us, out past Jupiter's path and into the darker reaches of space. But for the scientists who had tracked it since discovery, that fading wasn't an ending. It was part of the cycle. They had gathered enough information to study for years, spectra, images, orbital models, every faint pixel of light. Each one would become a puzzle piece in understanding what interstellar material is really like. And somewhere in that data, the mystery remains. Could it ever be proven to be artificial? Almost certainly not. The evidence points to nature, to rock and ice and radiation. But the more important truth is that asking the question has value on its own. It reminds us that even when we find no aliens, the universe still feels alive. Because it is. Every comet that passes, every rock that falls, every atom that drifts from one star to another, all of it is motion, communication, connection. The galaxy isn't silent. It just speaks in a language we're still learning to hear. If you close your eyes now and imagine the journey of that tiny traveler, you can almost feel it. The way it coasts through the dark, untouched, unhurried. The way sunlight warms it, then lets it go. The way gravity bends its path just enough to bring it near us before flinging it back out again. And you, sitting here, breathing quietly, are part of that same pattern. The carbon in your body, the oxygen in your lungs, the iron in your blood, they all came from other stars, just as 3i Atlas did. You are built from the same material that wanders between worlds, so when you think of that object sailing through the black, don't think of it as distant. Think of it as kin, a cousin from another system passing by to remind us of our shared origin. For a brief time, it crossed paths with our sun, and that alone is enough. Soon it will fade beyond detection. It will join the endless population of unseen travelers moving through interstellar space. But it leaves behind something important. Not proof of life, not evidence of ships, but something more enduring. It leaves behind wonder, curiosity, and a renewed awareness that the universe is wider, older, and more connected than our brief human lives can fully grasp. And maybe, just maybe, that's the message it carried all along. When 3i Atlas crossed the far side of the sun, it was as if the universe had drawn a curtain. For weeks there were no new images, no data, only quiet waiting. The observatories fell still. Screens that once glowed with fresh readings showed nothing but background noise. The scientists waited, patient, steady, because they knew it would return to view. It always does. The path of the cosmos may be long, but it is precise. And then, one evening in November, the silence broke. A faint signal appeared in the instruments of the European Space Agency's spacecraft called JUICE, the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer. It wasn't built to study comets, but its sensors were sharp, and for a few hours it caught the ghostly shimmer of something crossing space, a streak of dust, a whisper of light. It was 3I, Atlas, alive in motion once again. From that distance, it looked nothing like the bright visitor it once was. The coma had shrunk to almost nothing. The tail stretched out so thin that even the most sensitive detectors could barely trace it. Yet there it was, gliding away, slipping past Jupiter's orbit and heading toward the cold edge of the solar system. Astronomers gathered again. They smiled quietly, relieved. After months of silence, the traveler had reappeared exactly where it should be. Its orbit matched the predictions to near perfection. The math, the physics, the patience, it had all held true. But as they examined the new data, something unexpected emerged again. JUICE had recorded minute fluctuations in the dust trail, tiny ripples like waves moving along a fine thread. They weren't strong enough to mean much, maybe just effects of radiation pressure or uneven gas flow, but they reminded everyone how little we truly know about these interstellar guests. One scientist wrote in her notebook, "Even the simplest bodies have patterns we don't yet understand." It wasn't a formal discovery, but it captured the spirit of the moment. Every time we think we have the universe mapped neatly, it offers a reminder, gently but firmly, that it's still full of secrets. Soon, as it continued outward, ground-based telescopes began to lose sight of it entirely. Even the largest observatories could barely detect its fading glow. To the human eye, it was gone, swallowed by the Black Sea between planets. But the data lingered. Teams around the world started to analyze months of recorded light, measuring the tiniest changes in brightness, mapping how its spin might have evolved, how its tail had shifted, how its color had deepened. It's strange how something so far away can bring people together like that. Hundreds of researchers scattered across continents, all studying a small speck of light that none of them could ever touch. Yet in their quiet focus you could sense a kind of unity. Every number entered into a spreadsheet, every line of code, written to model its orbit, was an act of shared curiosity. In those months, while the object was invisible, people began to talk less about aliens and more about perspective. 3IT Atlas had done something extraordinary. It had reminded humanity that space isn't empty. It's filled with travelers, some natural, some perhaps once made, all drifting through the galaxy on paths older than history. One evening, during a public lecture, an astronomer described it beautifully. She said, "Every interstellar object is a story written by another sun. When we read that story, we aren't just learning about them. We're learning about ourselves." That sentence echoed across social media and classrooms, passed around like a soft truth everyone already felt but couldn't quite phrase. Meanwhile, deep space missions kept their quiet watch. The Juno spacecraft near Jupiter scanned the area where 3I Atlas would soon pass. It wasn't close enough to take clear pictures, but sensors recorded faint dust particles moving faster than expected. Could they have come from the traveler? Maybe, or maybe not. It didn't really matter. Even the possibility filled people with quiet joy. Back on Earth, the James Webb team processed their final set of infrared data before the object's disappearance. They published their findings in a long, technical report filled with graphs, spectra, and chemical ratios. Buried near the end was a line that few noticed, but that carried quiet weight. The composition and reflectivity of 3i Atlas suggest long-term preservation of primordial material unaltered by stellar radiation. In simpler words, it was a time capsule, a piece of another solar system frozen in its original state. That realization made people pause. This wasn't just a passing rock, it was a messenger from another world's beginning. Somewhere, around another star, planets may have formed from the same dust. Maybe some of those planets still exist. Maybe one of them looks up at their night sky and wonders, just as we do, who else might be out there. There's something comforting about that symmetry. Two civilizations, separated by light years and time, both asking the same questions into the void. As the months passed, 3i Atlas continued outward, faster now, propelled by the sun's pull, turned into a push. The solar wind stretched its fading tail farther, like a ribbon unspooling into nothing. If you could somehow hover beside it, you'd see a dark, cratered body half-lit by distant sunlight. The stars would appear still, unmoving, and the only sound would be your own heartbeat. That's how space keeps its secrets, through silence. And maybe that's what draws us to it. The silence isn't emptiness, it's potential. The same potential that made our ancestors light fires on mountaintops to study the sky, that makes scientists build machines that can see beyond what eyes can. We look because we want to fill that silence with meaning. Back in observatories and classrooms, 3i Atlas slowly shifted from being an active subject to a legend. Professors began using it as an example in lectures about orbital mechanics and interstellar chemistry. Documentaries replayed its discovery, showing the blurry first images, the growing excitement, the debates, the final fade. Some narrated it as a story of science, others as a quiet meditation on curiosity itself. For the astronomers who had watched it firsthand, the end felt bitter-sweet. One of them wrote a note at the bottom of her report. It came, it glowed, it taught, it left. Nothing more. But those few words said everything. As for the public, the fascination never quite vanished. Some still believed in the possibility of it being a ship, a lonely probe drifting for eons, carrying a message too faint for us to decode. Others simply found peace in its story. Parents told their children that a visitor from another star had once passed through our sky, a real one, not from a movie. Kids drew pictures of it, sometimes with windows, sometimes with comet tails shaped like wings. And somewhere between the scientific truth and the human imagination lies the real meaning of 3i Atlas. It was proof that the universe still surprises us, that our search for meaning doesn't require proof of aliens or miracles. The act of wondering is enough. When it finally crossed the orbit of Jupiter, the last telescopes could no longer follow. The data grew faint, the signal blended with the cosmic background. At that moment, its journey through our solar system ended. Ahead lay only the long night between stars again. Imagine it there now, tiny, cold, ancient, its surface dark with carbon and dust, its trails fading behind it like forgotten breath. It will keep moving for millions, maybe billions of years, until one day, perhaps, another system catches it by chance. Maybe another world orbiting a distant star will spot it just as we did. Their astronomers will point their telescopes, measure its light, and wonder if it once passed through another sun's family. And in that wondering, the story will begin again. That is what interstellar objects truly are, not mysteries to solve, but bridges between civilizations that may never meet. They carry no message, yet they communicate something universal. that everything in space is connected by motion, by gravity, by curiosity. When you think of Three-Eyed the Atlas, think of it not as something gone, but as something continuing. It's out there now, beyond the reach of sunlight, gliding through the soft glow of the Milky Way. Each dust grain on its surface is a memory of another world, and now a little bit of ours too. For a short time it passed by, and we looked up, and we learned to listen a little better to the silence around us. If there's meaning in that, it's this. The universe doesn't need to shout to get our attention. Sometimes it only needs to send a small traveler through the dark, a faint visitor from another star, to remind us that wonder is still alive. And as you close your eyes tonight, you can imagine it moving, quiet, endless, weightless, beyond Jupiter, beyond Neptune, into the unseen. The light from our sun grows weaker on its back. Ahead, the stars blur into mist. It will keep going, long after our time is over, still carrying the story of its brief visit here, like a whispered hello that never quite fades. Long after 3i, Atlas slipped past Jupiter's invisible border, its light dimmed into something only machines could sense. The last observatories that could still pick up its trace, the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii, the Subaru Observatory, a few ESA ground stations, recorded final numbers before they too fell silent. It wasn't gone, not really. It had simply crossed that invisible horizon between the world we can study and the world we can only imagine. By then, the scientists had already begun speaking of it in the past tense. When 3i Atlas passed through, they'd say, when it showed us its spectrum. Even though it was still there, still traveling, they had to let it go. Because that's what space teaches you. Every discovery eventually becomes a memory. But not all memories fade the same way. Some linger quietly, reshaping the way we see everything else. It's strange how such a small, icy traveler, no wider than a few city blocks, could do that. For months, it had been a topic of debate, of research, of dreams. And now, in its absence, the meaning of its visit began to evolve. In classrooms, teachers started using it to explain what interstellar truly means. They'd draw diagrams showing the long, elegant arc of its journey, how it came from beyond the sun's reach, passed between Mars and Jupiter, then left again into darkness. Students would look at the chalk lines, at the impossibly large distances, and someone would always ask, but where did it really come from? And that's the question no one could yet answer. Somewhere, perhaps 1,000 light-years away, maybe more, another star had once cast off this object. It could have been born from a violent collision between planets, a dying sun flinging debris into space. Or it could have been pulled loose from a young system still forming, sent drifting long before Earth even existed. The age of such an object is nearly impossible to comprehend. It could have been traveling for hundreds of millions of years before anyone ever saw it. Longer than human civilization, longer than trees, longer than the continents as we know them. It had crossed the galaxy not once but perhaps many times, pulled gently by the gravity of passing stars, nudged by unseen currents of dark matter and gas, always moving, never stopping. That thought of something so small, so silent, crossing the entire Milky Way feels humbling. And yet what if it wasn't entirely silent? Some scientists still wondered. The alien mothership theory had faded from headlines, but in private discussions, late at night, a few physicists and astronomers admitted they still thought about it. Not because they believed it was a ship, but because they couldn't stop asking what if. What if an ancient civilization long before us had the technology to send small probes through interstellar space? What if those probes were designed not to be seen, built to resemble comets or asteroids, meant to drift unnoticed until they encountered another civilization capable of observing them? The idea wasn't new. It dated back to the 20th century, when the physicist Ronald Bracewell proposed that advanced species might send messenger probes instead of radio signals, silent travelers that could wander for millennia. carrying data or waiting to awaken when they sensed another intelligent mind nearby.
In theory, 3i Atlas could have fit that description.
It moved strangely. It reflected light unevenly. And though every physical explanation pointed to natural causes, the mystery still tugged softly at the edge of human imagination. No scientist dared to claim it as truth, but no one could stop people from wondering. And perhaps that's what made the story beautiful.
Not that it was an alien ship, but that it could have been.
The universe gave us something real enough to measure, mysterious enough to dream about. As months turned into a year, 3D Atlas grew smaller and colder. It drifted past Saturn's distant orbit, through regions filled with fine grains of ice and dust left behind by comets long gone. It didn't stir them, didn't disrupt them. It simply passed through, steady as breath. If you could have followed it, you'd see sunlight fading to almost nothing. At that distance, the sun would look no brighter than a star. The warmth of the solar wind would be gone, replaced by the deep chill of space, only a few degrees above absolute zero. And yet, even there, a kind of quiet beauty remained. Somewhere inside its frozen heart, gases once warmed by sunlight had crystallized again. When struck by a rare cosmic ray, tiny flashes of light might flicker through its dark body, microbursts of energy like distant fireflies. No human would ever see them, but they'd happen all the same, tiny reminders that even in silence, the universe still stirs. Back on Earth, time kept moving. Other discoveries filled the headlines: new exoplanets, the detection of biosignatures, the occasional comet bright enough to see with the naked eye. But every once in a while, 3i Atlas appeared again in conversation. It became a symbol of humility, a kind of cosmic mirror. It reminded people that not everything that enters our world does so for a reason we can easily name. Some things arrive just to remind us that the cosmos is older, larger, and more mysterious than we can grasp. And that's where the real magic lies, not in answers, but in the space between them. Astronomer Elena Prado once said in an interview, "Science isn't about closing mysteries, it's about learning to live among them peacefully." She had been part of the research team studying the light curves of 3i Atlas. She said she'd never forget the feeling of watching it fade on her screen, one pixel growing, dimmer night after night until it was gone. It was like saying goodbye to a friend you only met once, but somehow felt you'd known forever, she said. Her words resonated with people in ways she didn't expect. For a moment, science and emotion merged. The object was no longer just data. It was a reminder that curiosity itself is a human heartbeat.
And maybe that's why the story lingered.
Even among children, the fascination persisted. In one classroom, a teacher read them a simplified version of the story, a small, icy traveler that had come from another star. The children drew it afterward, their versions glowing with colors the real one never had: soft blues, bright greens, purple tails, silver domes. One little boy said it must be a starship that got tired and just wanted to rest. And somehow that description wasn't far from the truth. Because rest is what 3i Atlas finally found. Beyond Neptune, beyond Pluto, it entered the outer reaches of the Kuiper Belt. There, among slow-moving bodies and frozen debris, it drifted peacefully. It no longer glowed, no longer emitted tail gas, or reflected sunlight bright enough to see. It simply was a piece of the galaxy at rest. The scientists say that within another few years it will leave even that region behind and cross into true interstellar space again, the vast cold gulf between stars. Out there, nothing will disturb it. It will move in darkness for as long as the galaxy spins, untouched by light or gravity strong enough to change its path. Perhaps that is its purpose, to travel without end, to remind us that movement can be its own kind of existence. Sometimes, when you think of it that way, you start to realize how everything in life follows that same pattern. We move through our own small orbits, around people, around memories, around the things we love. We leave traces, faint ones, that others might one day find and wonder about. Maybe that's why 3i Atlas feels personal, even though it's impossibly far away. It's not just an object, it's a reflection of every traveler who's ever felt out of place but kept moving anyway. If it had consciousness, maybe it would think of us too, tiny flickers of life orbiting a pale star, watching the sky, reaching out through telescopes and whispers, hoping to understand. But maybe not. Maybe it just drifts timeless, and that's enough. Still, sometimes when people talk about it, there's a quiet hope beneath their words, that someday, maybe far in the future, we might send our own version of 3-eyed Atlas outward, a ship built not to conquer or to return, but simply to carry our story forward, to say, we were here.
Until then, the real traveler keeps going.
Past the faint border of the heliopause, where the sun's magnetic field gives way to the soft pressure of interstellar gas, the temperature drops even lower. The starlight around it changes hue, from the warm yellows of our sun to the faint bluish whites of faraway stars. It's alone but not lonely. The galaxy is full of travelers like it, most unseen, some yet to be discovered. Each one carries a story. And though they move through silence, together they form the quiet hum of a universe that never stops creating, never stops moving. If you listen closely, maybe that's what the stars are, echoes of travelers like 3-eyed Atlas burning bright for a while before fading into the next mystery. And tonight, as you imagine that faint speck gliding away from everything we know, you might feel a kind of calm settle in. Because in its endless journey there's something familiar, something deeply human, the search for where we come from, the longing to know what lies beyond, the acceptance that maybe, just maybe, the wondering itself is enough. Far beyond where any human eyes could follow, 3i Atlas drifted through the outermost edge of the solar wind. The invisible boundary of the sun's reach stretched thinner here, like a veil of light slowly dissolving into the dark. The warmth that once brushed its frozen skin was gone now. Only the faint hum of cosmic rays remained, a soft static that filled the infinite silence. You could imagine it, this small, dark traveler floating in a place where time itself seemed to slow down. The sun was no longer a blazing disk, but a bright pin, distant and pale. Its glow barely touched the comet's surface, leaving it cold and still. Yet even in that stillness, something about its path felt alive. There was motion, quiet but constant. There was purpose, though it had no mind to know it. Scientists called this point the heliopause, the place where the sun's influence ends and interstellar space begins. To most, it was just a border defined by numbers and magnetic fields. But to others, it was a doorway. The moment 3i Atlas crossed it, it became something new. It was no longer a visitor in our solar system. It was a messenger returning home to the stars. Somewhere on Earth, astronomers sat in quiet rooms, lit only by the glow of their monitors. They watched their last bits of data fade from the screen. No more light curves, no more readings. The comet had slipped beyond the range of every telescope. What remained were the models, the numbers, and the memories. But what if, just for a moment, you could see through its eyes? You'd see a galaxy that stretched endlessly in all directions. You'd see the faint shimmer of dust clouds glowing blue and gold. You'd see stars blinking like scattered cities far below. You'd see darkness, not as emptiness, but as a deep sea holding the promise of everything yet to be found. In that darkness, 3i Atlas drifted. It did not hurry. It did not slow. It simply moved, as it had always done, following the quiet current of the Milky Way's gravity. Each year, each century, each millennium, it would pass through regions no light had reached in ages. Sometimes it might cross paths with another wanderer, a fragment of rock, a shard of ice, a speck of ancient dust. They'd glide past each other, close enough to share a moment before drifting apart forever.
Nothing touched.
Nothing changed. Yet somehow, even those passing encounters felt sacred, as if every crossing in the void carried a whisper of meaning. On Earth, people began to tell stories again. They weren't about equations or data anymore. They were about wonder, about a lonely traveler that had come from the stars and returned to them. Some said it was just rock and ice, but others felt there was something more, a feeling, a symbol, a quiet reminder that we too are wanderers in the dark. Children learned its name in school, written on chalkboards in small white letters. 3I Atlas, the teacher would say softly, drawing its long curved path through the solar system. It came from somewhere far beyond, and now it's going home. And though the children didn't yet understand what home meant in that cosmic way, they liked the idea of it. They liked knowing that even something as small as a frozen piece of dust could belong somewhere. A few decades later, the spacecraft Voyager 1, launched long before most people alive had been born, was still drifting out there too, not far from the path 3I Atlas had taken. The two would never meet, but their trails would almost cross, like faint echoes calling across time. Both were travelers. Both carried pieces of humanity's story, one by design, one by accident. Voyager carried a golden record with the sounds of Earth, waves, birds, children's laughter, and greetings in dozens of languages. 3I Atlas carried nothing man-made, yet its very existence was a message. It said, well, we are not alone. There are other worlds, other beginnings. You can almost picture it, these two wanderers passing each other in the night, one built by hands, one shaped by the birth of stars. The thought of it is enough to make your heart quiet. And maybe that's what 3I Atlas was meant to do, to quiet us, to remind us that even in all our searching, the answers might not come in a rush of discovery, but in a moment of stillness. As it moved deeper into interstellar space, radiation slowly reshaped its surface. Layers of ice that had once shimmered under sunlight grew darker. Tiny impacts from micrometeoroids carved faint new scars across its face. But inside, beneath those layers, the ancient materials that formed it remained untouched, frozen stories from another star. If a future civilization ever finds it, they might slice into its surface and find traces of another sun's dust. Maybe a hint of alien chemistry. Maybe something we've never seen before. And they might say, this is where it began, but for now it just drifts. Thousands of years will pass. The stars themselves will shift across the sky. Empires will rise and fall, languages will fade, and human life may change in ways no one can predict. Yet, 3I Atlas will keep moving, unbothered, unchanged, unhurried.
And that's what makes it strangely comforting.
It's a symbol of endurance, a reminder that not everything needs to rush, that some things are meant to simply be. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the quiet rhythm of its journey. Not a sound, but a feeling, a soft pulse that matches your own heartbeat, the rhythm of the universe itself. Somewhere far away, another star may be forming. Around it, new worlds will spin, still hot and bright, waiting to cool. Maybe, just maybe, one of those worlds will someday send its own comet our way. And when it does, it will complete a circle we never meant to draw, a silent exchange between stars, saying, I see you, I remember. And perhaps, when that day comes, another species, whoever they are, wherever they live, will look up at their sky and wonder what it means. They'll see a faint point of light moving faster than any of their own comets, and they'll give it a name. They'll ask the same question we did. What if it's not just a rock? And maybe that's the truest legacy of 3I Atlas, not the data, not the orbit, but the question itself. The quiet curiosity that refuses to fade. The same question that keeps humanity awake under the stars long after the telescopes are turned off. Even now, as it drifts far beyond our reach, its story continues, not in the cold vacuum of space, but in the minds that still wonder. Every person who's ever looked up at the night sky and felt small, every child who's ever drawn a spaceship on paper and whispered, maybe there's someone out there.
Because 3I Atlas gave us that whisper back.
It showed us that the universe is not empty. It's alive with motion, with mystery, with the possibility that something far beyond us is watching too. And so it travels still through the slow-turning arms of the Milky Way, carrying the light of countless stars reflected faintly in its dark surface. Maybe one day it will pass another civilization. Maybe their telescopes will catch it, and their scientists will gather and argue and dream just as we did. And maybe one of them will smile softly and say, "What if it's an alien mothership?" Not because they believe it is, but because wondering feels so good. Because curiosity is the language of the cosmos itself. And somewhere in that shared wonder we'll all be connected, tiny lights drifting in the same endless dark. By the time millennia had passed, the name 3I Atlas was no longer found only in old research archives. It had become something more, a quiet legend spoken under new skies, on a world that had changed so much it barely remembered what the Earth once looked like. Humanity had travelled far by then. The first steps to Mars had long since turned into colonies, the first colony into a civilization, and that civilization into something broader still. But even as cities rose on other planets and stations floated between the stars, the story of 3I Atlas lived on. Children heard it first, whispered in classrooms made of glass that looked out on red dust or silver moons. Teachers would say there was once a comet that came from beyond all this, a wanderer older than our sun. The children would lean close to the sound of that phrase. They liked that word, wanderer. It felt gentle, brave, and endlessly curious all at once. In those years, humanity had built telescopes larger than mountains. They floated quietly on the edge of Jupiter's orbit, turning like flowers towards starlight. They watched the deep sky not with mirrors but with webs of light, folding space to peer into other galaxies. And though these instruments could see back to the birth of time itself, there was still something about 3I Atlas that felt special. Its name carried a warmth the machines couldn't explain. You could imagine one of those astronomers working late, her room filled with the faint hum of filters and data streams. She might glance at a tiny plaque on the wall, a small metal plate engraved with the comet's name, and smile. Not because she thought of it as alien or mysterious, but because it reminded her that science began with wonder. Before the numbers and the measurements, before the equations that bent gravity to will, there was a simple question. What if? That question had followed humanity across centuries.
It had shaped every journey, every risk, every dream of the stars.
And when the long nights came, and they always did, that question felt like a hand reaching out of the dark. There were stories now woven from memory and imagination. Some said the comet was still out there, gliding between the stars. Others said it had slowed, that something within it had awakened, a machine or mind, quiet and ancient, waiting. A few even whispered that 3I Atlas had become a kind of guide, a beacon that appeared whenever a civilization was ready to look outward again. Of course, scientists didn't believe such things, but they didn't try to stop the stories either. They knew that sometimes belief kept the soul of discovery alive in ways pure logic couldn't. And perhaps, somewhere deep down, even they liked to imagine it, a traveller so old, so unbroken, still wandering. Every few generations new astronomers would search the outer dark, hoping to glimpse it again. They never did, yet the searches themselves became rituals, repeated lovingly, like lighting a candle in remembrance. Humanity understood that some things weren't meant to be found again. Some were meant to be wondered about forever. Imagine a night on a far colony world, one of the many that circled a soft white star. The air is still. The ground hums faintly with the pulse of energy fields that keep the domes alive. A child sits beside her grandmother who points to a faint smudge in the sky, a long, pale band that stretches from horizon to horizon.
"That's the Milky Way," the grandmother says softly.
And somewhere out there, far beyond where we can see, travels 3I Atlas, the Wanderer. The child blinks up at the streak of light.
Is it really an alien mothership?
She asks, voice barely more than a breath. The grandmother smiles. Maybe not, but that's the beauty of it. We never knew for sure, and sometimes not knowing is what keeps us looking. The little one nods slowly, her eyes tracing the glow of the galaxy. Somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet fascination begins to stir, the same kind that had once drawn people to gaze up from Earth's old blue skies. And so, even after ages of progress, after humanity had built homes in the void and walked beneath alien suns, that feeling remained. The pull of mystery, the peace in not having all the answers. Scientists in that age had developed ways to simulate entire cosmic events in perfect detail. They could model a star's birth down to the particle. They could recreate the orbit of a long-lost comet with flawless precision. But even then, when they tried to simulate 3i Atlas, something strange always happened. No matter how carefully they programmed it, the model would drift slightly off course. Just a fraction, a barely noticeable deviation. But it was enough to make the scientists smile. They called it the Atlas Whisper, a playful reminder that even the most advanced minds couldn't capture the full truth of the universe. One of the astronomers, an old man named Rian, used to tell his students that maybe the whisper was 3i Atlas's way of saying hello. Maybe it was telling them not to forget that every equation was born from awe. You can't measure wonder, he'd say, you can only feel it. And his students, half believing, would look out through the observatory dome, watching the stars flicker in slow rhythm. Somewhere, beyond all charts and coordinates, they knew that small, ancient traveler was still out there, turning slowly, carrying stories older than any civilization. Generations passed. The stars shifted. Even the shape of the galaxy began to stretch and bend. But the legend of the interstellar wanderer did not fade. It became a symbol, painted on ships, etched into the hulls of stations, whispered as blessings by pilots before each launch. Let Atlas guide your way, they'd say. And maybe in some unseen way it did. For even if it was just a comet, a relic from another star system, its passage had left an imprint deeper than gravity itself. It had reminded humankind that curiosity was sacred, that to look up at the unknown and whisper, "What if?" was the closest thing to prayer the universe might ever hear. And so, wherever people journeyed, whether through new star clusters or toward the edges of mapped space, they carried that same feeling. That quiet hum in the chest, that awareness that something was always watching, not with eyes, but with presence. In that way, 3i Atlas never truly left. It simply changed form, becoming an echo in the human spirit, a part of the endless rhythm that connects all explorers, all dreamers, all beings who have ever dared to look at the sky and feel small, yet infinite. And in those rare nights, when the galaxy's light dimmed just enough, some swore they could see a faint glimmer moving slowly through the distance. Not a ship,
Not a star.
just a soft shimmer like the trace of an old friend passing quietly by. It had been so long that even the memory of humanity was like dust drifting between galaxies. The Earth, that small blue spark where the first eyes once looked up and named the stars, was gone now, quietly absorbed by the slow breathing of time. What remained were fragments, silent satellites still orbiting nothing, crumbling ships lost in forgotten trajectories, a few recordings whispering in the dark. Yet one thing had endured. The comet. 3i Atlas was still traveling, as steady and patient as ever. It had crossed countless light years, passed through the shadows of dead stars and the warm glow of new ones being born. It had watched galaxies tilt and stretch, felt the pulse of distant quasars, seen the faint shimmer of cosmic dust forming new worlds. And though it could not think or feel, its journey carried an echo, one that never faded, far away, on a planet circling a bright golden sun that had never known Earth. Life had risen again. Not human life, but something else, quiet, graceful beings with translucent skin that glowed faintly under their twin moons. They lived in harmony with the hum of their world, listening to the wind as though it were a song. Their scientists, if you could call them that, were dreamers more than analysts. They studied the sky, not with machines, but with vast floating lenses that shimmered in the air, bending starlight into patterns of sound. To them the universe was not measured but heard, and one night, while mapping the songs of nearby comets, they found a tone unlike any they had heard before. It was low, steady, and ancient, a sound like the heartbeat of something older than their world itself. They called it the Wanderer's Note. For days they listened. The frequency barely shifted, as if the source were gliding through space without resistance. When they finally traced it, they saw the faint light of a small, slow object, dark against the stars, haloed by a thin mist of frozen gases. 3i Atlas, they didn't know the name, of course. To them, it was Elura, the sleeping messenger. They believed it was not just a piece of rock and ice, but a vessel carrying the whispers of extinct worlds. In their great observatory, a sprawling web of crystal and light suspended over their planet C, they began to study it. Through their shimmering instruments, they saw traces of elements that did not belong to their system: nickel, carbon, oxygen in strange ratios, and faint electromagnetic scars across its surface, signs of radiation from long-gone stars, signs of a journey no one could measure. Their philosophers were the first to speak. "It carries memory," one of them said softly, her voice like a melody. Not of thought, but of existence. Perhaps that is all memory truly is. They sent signals into space, soft waves of sound and light shaped by emotion rather than words. They weren't calling out to the comet, but through it. They believed it could carry their message onward, the same way it had once carried light from other suns. They spoke not of gods or creation, but of connection. They told the story of their world, of wind over silver seas, of forests that sang with the tides, of a people who learned to listen instead of conquer.
They didn't ask for answers.
They didn't expect to be heard. They only wanted to join the great chain of wonder that stretched across time. And perhaps, in some small way, the universe listened. As the comet passed the outer edge of their system, it caught a faint shimmer of light from their sun. For the first time in countless ages, its surface warmed again. A thin veil of vapor rose and scattered behind it, leaving a glowing trail across their night sky. The beings looked up in awe. For them, it was not a coincidence, it was a reply. They sang songs of gratitude, of journeys unending, of the beauty of being small in an infinite home. When the comet finally faded from view, they built a monument in its honor, a tall spiral of glass reaching into the sky, designed to catch the faint hum of cosmic dust. And at its heart, they carved a single phrase in their language: "To travel is to remember." Centuries later, their descendants, now voyagers themselves, would find the monument and wonder what it had meant. The spiral had become ancient, half buried in the shifting sands of their planet. But when sunlight hit it at the right angle, it still sang, a faint, harmonic tone, echoing the path of the sleeping messenger. In that moment, one of them, a young explorer standing barefoot in the dust, looked up at the faint streak of light crossing their sky and felt something she couldn't name.
It wasn't faith.
It wasn't science. It was closer to recognition. She didn't know it, but she was standing where others once had, long ago on another world under a different sun. The feeling was the same. That mix of curiosity and peace, the quiet ache of knowing the universe was vast and kind enough to let you wonder. And so in her ship, small and silver, built not for war but for listening, she set her course toward the trace of 3i Atlas. She would never catch it, of course. The comet moved too slowly for the universe and too steadily for the impatience of travelers. But she didn't need to catch it. She only needed to follow. She drifted beyond her world, her engines low and silent, guided by the same hum that her ancestors had heard. Each day, she recorded her journey, not in coordinates or speed, but in emotions, awe, calm, hope, gratitude. When she finally sent her first transmission home, she said only this: "I think I understand now. It's not about what it is, it's about what it leaves behind." And with that, she turned off her transmitter, let the hum of her ship fade into the background, and closed her eyes as stars passed slowly by. Somewhere far ahead, the faint shimmer of the comet's trail glowed softly, like a path through the dark. She followed it not to find answers, but to be part of the story that began long before her world ever existed. And maybe, if she listened closely enough, she could almost hear the faintest whisper, an echo left behind by another species on another planet who had once looked up and asked the same question. What if it's an alien mothership? Out beyond the rim of the galaxy, where the Milky Way's arms thinned into ribbons of fading starlight, 3i Atlas continued on. It had left behind the last warmth of suns, the last faint hum of radio waves from thinking minds. Ahead lay only the deep intergalactic dark, a silence so complete that even light seemed hesitant to pass through it. Yet the comet kept going. It always did. It had no purpose, no destination.
Only motion.
If anyone could have seen it, they might have thought it looked almost alive. Its surface shimmered with faint, frozen scars left by centuries of starlight. Every mark, every groove, every grain of dust clinging to its shell told a story, a record of suns it had passed, winds it had crossed, and civilizations it had brushed by without knowing. There were no eyes now to watch it, no telescopes, no curious voices. The galaxy it had once visited, the one that birthed humans and their fragile questions, had grown quiet. Its stars had aged, bloated, and dimmed. Its spiral arms had stretched and blurred into the haze of cosmic drift. The radio songs of civilizations once buzzing through space like fireflies had long gone out. And yet somehow the universe didn't feel empty.
It never really was.
The dark wasn't nothing. It was full of whispers, of faint traces left behind by things that had lived, thought, and wondered. 3i Atlas drifted through that vastness, carrying with it the smallest of those traces. Tiny particles from other systems clung to its frozen body, bits of metal, fragments of ice, microscopic pieces of memory. In a way, it was a vessel. Not of technology, not of aliens, but of existence itself. Imagine it now, the comet turning slowly, its faint tail glimmering when it crosses a rare beam of light from some faraway cluster. For a moment it shines, and then the glow fades again. But that moment, oh, that single shimmer, is enough to carry a message across unimaginable distances. Not a message in words, something simpler, quieter.
A feeling.
The same feeling that once made a child on Earth look up at the night sky and ask, "What is that?" The same wonder that made scientists trace its orbit, philosophers dream about its purpose, and storytellers whisper that maybe, just maybe, it was more than stone and ice. Somewhere deep inside, in the cold heart of the comet, lay atoms older than any star still burning. Those atoms had seen the universe's first light. They had been there when galaxies were just clouds, when matter itself was a question without an answer. And they remembered, not as thoughts, but as presence.
Eons passed.
The Milky Way merged with another galaxy, then another. The slow ballet of gravity rearranged the heavens into something new, unrecognizable. Still, the comet drifted between them, a wanderer unclaimed by any home. Eventually even galaxies became fewer. The expansion of space stretched them apart like islands lost in an infinite sea. The great cosmic web thinned. The light grew colder. But in that quiet, something began to happen. Far from where any life had ever bloomed, particles floating in intergalactic dust started to come together. Slowly, delicately, they formed structures, tiny grains at first, then clumps, then spheres. Gravity began its gentle work again, as it always did. And by some immeasurable coincidence, or perhaps not a coincidence at all, 3I Atlas passed through that region. Its faint gravitational tug disturbed the dust just enough to spark a collapse. Over time, that collapse became a nebula. Over longer time still, it became a new star. The comet couldn't notice. It simply kept drifting, unaware that it had just seeded the birth of a new sun. Around that sun, planets would form, new worlds, new skies, and maybe one day, eyes would look up from one of those worlds and see another comet crossing their sky. They would name it, they would study it, they would wonder, and thus the story would begin again. The universe was like that, endlessly patient, endlessly cyclical. It forgot nothing, even when it seemed to.
Every motion left a trace, every encounter a ripple.
Even a lone traveler like 3I Atlas, moving silently through eternity, could stir creation itself. If you could listen to the hum of the cosmos, then, not with ears, but with whatever part of you hears wonder, you'd hear a pattern, slow, soft, rhythmic.
A pulse, like a heartbeat.
It was the sound of things remembering. Somewhere, in a future so far it couldn't be measured, a new kind of mind might rise. Not made of flesh or circuitry, but of light and thought woven into the very fabric of space-time. These beings would not live on planets or breathe air. They would exist in the electromagnetic fields between stars, and they too would sense it, the faint, gliding shadow of something ancient crossing their domain. They'd study its trajectory, map its slow curve, trace its faint chemical trail. And when they realized how far it had traveled, they'd pause. It had come from a time before their kind existed, from a galaxy that no longer shone, from a civilization that had burned bright, asked questions and then gone quiet. The light beings would gather, exchanging thoughts like ripples in water. One of them would say, "It carries history."
Another would whisper, "It carries memory."
And together they'd agree on one simple thing: it deserved to be left undisturbed. They'd chart its course, archive its composition, and then let it drift onward, untouched, because some stories aren't meant to be interrupted. Years later, though years meant nothing to them, a few of those light beings would still think about it. They'd share the story with younger minds, shaping it into something gentle, something close to myth. They'd say, "There was once a traveler from the ancient ages. It passed through our realm without a word, but we felt its presence. We called it the Keeper of Silence." And when those young ones looked into the void, they'd see not emptiness, but possibility. They'd feel the same quiet awe that every species before them had felt when they first looked up and realized they were not alone. In that way, 3I Atlas would live forever, not as matter, but as story, not as artifact, but as wonder. Because in every age, across every form of consciousness, there would always be that question. The same one whispered by humans long ago under the glow of their fragile moon. What if it's something more? And maybe, just maybe, that question was the true purpose of it all. The reason the universe made travelers like comets and dreamers like us. So that, somewhere in the infinite dark, someone would always be asking. In the farthest reaches of time, when even the galaxies had grown old and dim, the universe rested in a kind of soft twilight. The last of the bright stars had burned themselves to pale embers, and the once golden spirals of the Milky Way had stretched so wide that the spaces between them could no longer be crossed, not even by light itself. The cosmos had become quiet again, like an ancient library after its final visitor had left. And yet, even then, something still moved. 3I Atlas was still out there. It had grown darker now, its ice, long since hardened into glass-like crystal, its surface layered with dust, gathered from countless forgotten suns. It didn't shine anymore. It didn't even reflect light, for there was none left to reflect. It was a shadow drifting through shadows, a fragment of memory coasting through eternity. But inside, deep within its frozen heart, traces of energy still hummed. Not heat, not motion, but something more subtle. The kind of energy that isn't measured, only felt. A remnant of its passage through every light and field it had ever touched. If you could somehow stand beside it, not with a body, but as a thought, you might sense the echoes, faint vibrations of every civilization that had ever wondered about it. Humans, the glowing beings of sound, the thinkers of light, all their curiosity, all their awe had brushed against it and left a mark. It was not consciousness, but something close, a memory of being remembered. By then, the fabric of space had stretched so far that galaxies no longer saw one another. The night sky, once a sea of countless stars, was almost bare. Those few stars that remained glowed faintly red, their warmth barely enough to light the dust around them. Even the great black holes at the centers of galaxies had begun to fade, losing their pull as space expanded beyond their reach. In that immense stillness, Three-Eye Atlas floated on, carried by nothing more than inertia and something else.
Something like destiny.
It was, after all, made from the same particles that built suns, the same dust that had once formed planets and lives and stories. It carried within it the seeds of what the universe used to be. And so when the last flicker of starlight finally vanished, the comet did not stop. It drifted into a realm of pure dark, where the laws of physics themselves had grown soft, tired, and quiet. Time no longer moved in the way it once had. It stretched, looped, folded. Reality itself began to thin like old paper. It was here, at the edge of everything, that something extraordinary happened. The faint pulse inside Three-Eye Atlas, that whisper of energy left behind by the memories of countless civilizations, began to resonate. Slowly at first, then brighter, stronger. Not as light, not as sound, but as a kind of pattern, like the rhythm of thought. The comet, long dead, began to hum. The hum spread through the vacuum, awakening dormant particles scattered across eternity. The resonance grew, weaving into the very structure of space. What had been silence became vibration. What had been stillness became movement. And then, like the first dawn of the first universe, there was light. A small spark, so small it wouldn't have filled the space of a single atom, flickered to life. It burned quietly, almost shyly, then expanded. Not an explosion, but a bloom, like a flower opening after endless winter. That spark became a new beginning.
A new cosmos rising from the remains of the old.
The energy released by that tiny pulse grew into waves, folding upon themselves, birthing particles, fields, and time. A new reality uncoiled from the dark, gentle, vast, waiting to be filled again with motion and meaning. And somewhere, in the still center of that creation, the ancient remnant of Three-Eye Atlas dissolved, not as matter, but as memory. The vibration that had carried across all time became the heartbeat of the new universe.
It didn't vanish. It transformed.
The laws that would govern this new reality carried within them traces of the old one, gravity that whispered of connection, light that remembered warmth, motion that remembered curiosity. Even the cosmic dust that would someday form new stars held echoes of what once was. And maybe, billions of eons later, in that newborn cosmos, life would arise again.
Eyes would open under alien skies. Minds would wonder at the night.
And somewhere, far from their world, another small traveler, made of ice, stone, and hope, would appear in their sky. They would name it. They would measure it. They would tell stories about it. And one of them, perhaps sitting by the glow of their planet's moons, would whisper to another, "What if it's not just a rock? What if it's something ancient?
Something sent to remind us?"
And so the story would begin again. Because that's what the universe does. It remembers. Not through data, not through monuments, but through wonder. Every generation, every being that ever looked up, left behind a spark. Together those sparks wove a tapestry that not even time could tear apart. So even in the final darkness before the dawn of everything new, the question remained. The same question that began it all. What if? And perhaps that was the truest purpose of Three-Eye Atlas all along, not to be understood, but to be wondered about. To drift through time and space carrying the simplest truth the cosmos ever whispered, that curiosity is eternal, and even when all else fades, it will find a way to light the dark again. The newborn universe was soft at first, more a slow breath than a burst. Space unfolded like silk, being drawn open in the dark, smooth and weightless, and light seeped through its seams in pale ripples. There were no stars yet, no planets, only warmth and potential, as if the cosmos itself were waking from a long, dreamless sleep. Time didn't rush here. It stretched gently, like the rhythm of a calm heartbeat. The silence that had filled the last age was gone, replaced by a hum so faint it could barely be called sound. It was the echo of that ancient vibration, the one that had once pulsed through Three-Eye Atlas, the same tone that had seeded this new beginning. Over ages beyond measure, light gathered. Gravity wove invisible threads, pulling gas and dust into spirals. The first stars of the new cosmos kindled, glowing softly at first, then brighter, filling the darkness with color again. Blue giants, red dwarfs, golden suns, each born from the whisper of the last. It was, in a sense, the memory of the universe remembering itself. Among those stars, worlds began to form. Clouds condensed into oceans. Minerals became mountains. Heat and chemistry began their endless slow dance. And somewhere, on one small world orbiting a quiet yellow star, something stirred. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything like what had come before, but it was aware in its own quiet way. A flicker of perception, small and uncertain, rippled through the tide of life. It felt warmth. It sensed movement. And as it drifted beneath a young sky, it looked upward. There, against the faint shimmer of new constellations, something passed overhead. A pale trail of dust, illuminated by a sun just beginning to rise. The creature didn't know what it was seeing, couldn't name it, but deep within its forming consciousness, something resonated. A pulse that wasn't instinct but recognition. The memory of a story that had never truly been forgotten. That faint light in the sky, the remnant of the first comet of this new age, was born from the same dust that had once made Three-Eye Atlas. Its path was familiar, though no one alive could know why. It curved in the same slow, deliberate arc, like a signature written across eternity. As that small life form grew, changed, and evolved, its descendants inherited that same instinct to look up. They built shelters, then tools, then questions. They learned to map the heavens, tracing lines between stars, giving names to lights they could barely see. And when their first astronomers finally built instruments to study the sky, they noticed something strange, an object that didn't belong. It wasn't a planet, or a moon, or a local comet. It came from beyond their star system, moving faster than any celestial body they had ever recorded. Its orbit was long, its tail faint but steady. They named it the Wanderer of Dawn, some called it a messenger. Some believed it was a fragment from the birth of creation. Others thought it carried the essence of all things that had come before. Whatever they believed, one truth remained. Whenever the Wanderer crossed their sky, their world grew still. Cities dimmed their lights. People gathered on rooftops and in fields. Even the smallest villages paused to watch the faint arc of light stretch from one horizon to the other. And though none of them knew it, what they were seeing was the continuation of the same journey that had begun in another universe long before their own sons were born. The Wanderer had become a tradition. Every few generations, when it returned, stories resurfaced. Songs were written. Children stayed awake to see it. Priests, scientists, poets all found meaning in its passage. It was more than an object. It was a reminder that everything in the cosmos was connected. One of their poets once wrote, "It moves as though it remembers us before we existed." That line became etched into the heart of their culture. The wanderer was no longer just a celestial visitor, it was a symbol of hope. It told them that even as the stars aged and their world changed, there was continuity. When their technology grew and their curiosity expanded beyond their own skies, they sent out ships. They wanted to follow it, to trace its path through the galaxy. But they soon realized it moved faster and farther than they could ever reach. Still they tried. One ship, a small one, built for endurance rather than speed, set out in silence, carrying a single crew member. Her name was Ilera, and she had been chosen not for her knowledge, but for her calm. She was known for her patience, her steady voice, and her belief that understanding the universe was not about capturing it, but listening to it. For years, longer than most lives, she drifted through the void, chasing the wanderer's fading trail. Her ship hummed softly, powered by the light of the very stars that once belonged to another age. She watched as suns passed by like distant candles. She dreamed of oceans she'd never see again, of the world that had sent her off with songs and hope. And then one day, she found it. Not close enough to touch, not even close enough to study properly. But there it was, ahead of her ship, gliding through the dark like a faint silver ghost. Her instruments flickered. The readings made no sense. The object emitted no heat, no signal, nothing measurable. And yet, as she stared at it through her viewport, she felt a strange calm, a warmth that wasn't physical. It was as if the space between them was alive with memory. She whispered, "You've been here before, haven't you?" Of course it didn't answer. But as she spoke, a faint vibration passed through her ship's hull. A pulse, not mechanical, not random. A rhythm, steady and low, like the echo of a heartbeat from across time. Ilera smiled softly. "You remember," she said. And in that moment, she understood what all her people had been trying to say for generations, that the wanderer was not meant to be caught or explained. It was meant to be felt. It was a message from the universe to itself, a gentle reminder that nothing ever truly ends. When Ilera returned home many years later, she didn't bring data or samples. She brought silence and peace. When they asked her what she found, she said, "Not answers, just understanding." Her words became part of their teachings, inscribed on the walls of their observatories. The universe remembers itself through those who wonder. And from then on, every time the wanderer appeared in their sky, they didn't study it. They celebrated it. They sang to it. They whispered their questions to it, knowing that somehow those questions would become part of its long journey forward. The comet drifted on, carrying with it the faint hum of those voices, just as it once had before, on another world, under another sky, with another people who had also looked up and wondered if they were alone. Because even across infinite time, the same truth remained. Curiosity was the thread that stitched every age together. And 3i Atlas, whatever it had once been, was that thread. There came an age when even wonder began to fade. Stars were few, scattered across a thinning sky like the last embers of an old fire. The great civilizations that had once filled the galaxy, those that had built observatories, launched ships and written poetry to the wanderer, had grown quiet, then still. Some had left behind cities carved into frozen moons, others luminous archives drifting in the dark, but all of them shared one final truth. They had looked up. They had wondered. And in that act alone, they had become part of the story. The universe was ancient beyond memory now. Space had stretched so wide that light itself was a rare traveler. The cold was everywhere, soft and endless. And yet, in that silence, one faint glimmer moved on. The wanderer. It no longer had a tail or glow. It didn't cast shadows or reflect what little light remained. It was smaller now, worn smooth by eternity, as if time itself had sanded it down to a single idea. But it still moved, steady and unbroken through the dark that once called itself home. There were no eyes left to see it, no instruments left to measure it, but that didn't matter. The cosmos had never needed witnesses to exist. It had always been enough to simply be, and perhaps that was the final truth of Three-Eye Atlas, of the Wanderer. It had never needed to prove anything. Its purpose wasn't discovery or revelation or alien design. Its purpose was persistence, to keep going when everything else had stopped, to carry forward the simple act of motion, the purest symbol of life the universe ever made. Imagine it now gliding past the faint ruins of what had once been galaxies. Their shapes had dissolved into filaments, their light stretched so thin that it was more memory than illumination. Between those fading remnants, the Wanderer drifted on, alone yet never lonely, for within it were traces of everything it had ever passed, dust from the first stars, whispers from the worlds that once watched it, and even the faintest echoes of songs sung in its name. Every story, every question, every gaze turned upward, it carried all of it, woven into its frozen heart. Somewhere, deep within that cold, a pattern still pulsed, the same faint rhythm that had once stirred new stars from darkness. It was slower now, almost imperceptible, but still there, like the heartbeat of time itself refusing to fade. And perhaps that was what the universe had been waiting for all along, because when the very last particle of light finally dimmed, when all energy had spread so evenly that nothing more could move or change, that pulse remained, quiet, patient, eternal. And then so softly it almost went unnoticed, it stopped moving, not in defeat, not in exhaustion, simply because there was nowhere left to go. The fabric of space had thinned to its final breath, and all motion folded inward. The Wanderer rested, surrounded by the echo of everything it had ever known. For the first time since the beginning, there was stillness. But stillness, in the universe's language, was never truly the end. It was pause, reflection, a moment between one heartbeat and the next. And within that pause, the faint pattern that had travelled across endless eons began to rise again. Not as vibration this time, but as memory, the memory of warmth,
of light, of life.
It grew stronger, not in space, but in meaning. Every civilization that had ever lived, every question ever asked, every whisper that had ever risen toward the stars, all of it began to resonate. Together they became the same tone that had once hummed through the core of Three-Eye Atlas. And in that vibration, the universe remembered itself. For an instant that stretched beyond time, everything that had ever been was present again. The stars, the galaxies, the small blue planet where it had all begun, the people who had looked up and named it, the beings who had followed its path, the poets who had sung to it.
All of them shimmered in a single endless moment of recognition.
It wasn't rebirth.
It wasn't resurrection.
It was awareness, the realization that the universe had never been about beginnings or endings, but continuity. The Wanderer's pulse merged with that awareness, and then, quietly, beautifully, it became light again. Not the blinding light of stars, but a soft, golden radiance that filled the dark like dawn, returning after an eternal night. That light spread, slow and gentle, weaving itself into the fabric of nothingness, turning it into something once more. It carried with it a message, though there was no one left to hear it, a single truth that transcended all forms of existence. Wonder is the first breath of creation. And with that breath, the cycle began again. The new universe bloomed, not as an explosion, but as a sigh. Its first particles stirred with the rhythm that had once belonged to a comet named by a species long gone. Its stars would shine with the faint echo of all who had ever wondered before. Its worlds would someday look up again, tracing the path of another wandering light, giving it a new name and asking the same eternal question. What if it's not just a rock? And in that question, in that tiny spark of curiosity, the cosmos would remember itself once more. Because in every age, in every life, the universe finds a way to tell the same story of a traveler, a whisper, a light that never truly fades. And as that new light spread, the last remnant of the old wanderer dissolved into it completely, its atoms scattered into the newborn dust. It was no longer a comet, no longer a memory, no longer a myth. It was everything. It was the pulse at the heart of time, the voice of creation itself quietly saying, "I am still here." And though there was no one left to listen, that whisper became the first sound of the new dawn. The wanderer's journey was complete, and yet it had only just begun.